listening to Masters of Reinvention. I'm Angela Watson Robertson. My guest today is Dr. Carl Greer, who is talking with us about his recent book, Change the Story of Your Health, and how you can write a new story for your health and your life. Dr. Greer, I want to just dive in and talk a little bit more about this concept of having an inner healer, because you talk about that a lot in your book. So can you tell me exactly what does it mean that we all have our own inner healer?
From a Jungian perspective, we are made up of many parts, some of which we are conscious of and some we're not. And Jungians might call those parts having an archetypal nature, that an archetype would influence how we think, act, and feel, and again, consciously and unconsciously impact how we live our lives. So one such inner figure could be an inner wise person. It could also be an inner healer. Andrew Weil, who's a pioneer in integrative medicine, talks about our own intrinsic, innate healing mechanisms and how if we can learn how to mobilize those, we can become healthier. And it's a small extension from that to think that those mechanisms can be thought of as a energy with awareness, which I call the inner healer. And I really believe we have such of an energy within us that we can learn to relate to. That's what I mean by inner healer.
Okay. So if someone didn't resonate with maybe the word healer, it sounds like they could refer to it, as you said, the inner wise woman, or inner wise man, the inner energy. There's, excuse me, lots of terms they could use for that kind of energy within them.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
That has information for us and that can help us. We can work with it.
Okay. So it's definitely something on our side that we can work with.
Yes. I mean, it may have a different opinion than our ego position. And some of these inner figures may not always be simpatico with our ego position, but we can learn to work with them. And if we don't learn to work with them, we do it at our peril because, again, from a Jungian perspective, that which has not been made conscious can come up and grab us and bite us.
Oh, that's a good point. So you want to really be cultivating that relationship with the inner healer. So what are some ways you can really work with your own inner healer, your own inner wisdom, to learn something about your health that you might not discover if you did not work with this inner energy?
Have a conversation with it. Actually set up a formal way of, it's almost, I don't want to overuse the word sacred, but it's doing, sacred spiritual work where we're honoring these energies that are bigger than we. And that once we've kind of set ourselves up in that mode, then recognize that we do have these inner parts that can be of service to us, but they may have an agenda that's different than we know. And if we could just listen to them and ask them, what message do you have for me today about my health? What do you want from me? What do I need to maybe give up or do less of to have better health? What do I need to do more of? What do I need to gain to have better health? To have that kind of a conversation. And then once it's done, like with a person, thank that energy for working with you. This idea of gratitude that you're working with in a reciprocal way. What can I do for you now? What can I do for you? And all these works of asking and giving and taking, what can I do for you as well as what could you do for me?
Okay, so just like any relationship, not just using this energy, but also working with the energy and giving as well as receiving.
Yes.
Okay. So if someone is interested in really diving into some of these shamanic practices, of course, working with your book and reading your book is really helpful, but what is a first step toward really adding the shamanic practices into their daily life? Just the average, modern working person, how would they add some of these practices into their daily life?
I'd say spend some time in preparing for them. And one way you do that is the notion, Angela, is that most of our lives are dictated by the sympathetic nervous system. We're kind of in our frontal lobes, and we're kind of, aware and, trying to react to stimuli and to plan and, just get our to-do list done. Whereas if you can get into a different mode where you are less influenced by the sympathetic nervous system, but more the parasympathetic nervous system, instead of the frontal lobes, it's more the hindbrain. Then you go into a place that some call integrative processing, where you're more aware and you can access these invisible realms that are around us all the time, but they're more present for you because you're more receptive to them. So the first step to your question would be you prepare yourself for these practices. And how do you do that? Well, one way is to breathe. You just kind of breathe in a way that kind of relaxes you, that kind of resets the brain. Instead of the beta alpha, it's more alpha theta. You're kind of have slower brain waves. You're operating from a different neurochemical place than you were. Then I talk about this idea of calling in the directions above and below. And the notion here is that this is a cosmic quantum physics idea, that we all came from someplace before the Big Bang. There was something before that. And I call it the source or the quiet, the place of pure potential where everything is possible. It's before the idea, the form of the idea. And something happened to stimulate our universe and all the forces seen and unseen, and all the planets and galaxies and stars and archetypes and people and plants. And one notion is that all of these things have an awareness. All of these things are connected to everything else. And if we can learn to relate to these seen and unseen things, this place of pure potential, we can cause things to happen that otherwise wouldn't. So when people call the directions, the medicine wheel and so forth, they're calling in emanations of this creative force, that they're using in their own ways to do things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So you breathe, you try to get your brain waves a little slower, you are more relaxed. Now you call in these emanations from spirit to work with you, to help you, and you believe that it's possible that there's things out there that you can't see that can actually work with you. Then you're ready to start to do the work. Then you might even learn to start to visualize that you're an energetic being with an energetic field, and then you can start to just see yourself. Do you feel frayed in your field? Do you feel it's coherent or not? And then you can learn to start to maybe mend it just with your mind. You say, but aren't I making all that stuff up? Well, yes and no, but what is it you're making up and who's making it up? So now you're prepared to do the work. A great place to do it is in nature. Be in nature. There's overwhelming evidence that if you're around evergreen trees, there's a chemical called phytoncide that influences your immune system positively. If you're around negative ions and running water, it influences the production of serotonin. So there's a lot of just being in nature. We talked about just the power of walking in the woods. It can reset you. Then you're more available to these realms, and then you can start to do the practices in ways that might be easier than if you're doing them without the preparation.
Okay. So it sounds like, in a really simplified way of saying it, one way that just the average person could start to implement some of these practices is getting into nature and spending more time in nature, paying more attention to breathing, to the breath, and then going back to that inner healer question, really engaging in a conversation, relationship with our inner healer a little bit more. Am I correct?
Yes, you are. And
okay.
That conversation. So your symptoms. I mean, let's say you have a migraine headaches. You could ask yourself, why do I keep getting you? What purpose are you serving? What meaning do you have in my life? What do I need to give up to have less of you? What do I need to gain to have less of you? So it's
okay. And that conversation with the inner healer, is this a conversation that has to be said out loud? Can it be done, writing? How does that conversation look with that inner healer?
It could be done out loud. It can be done in writing. One way to do it is get a stone and blow in, however you envision what that inner healer's energy is, blow in that energy. Then you put it across from you, and that is your inner healer. You ask it a question. Then you actually physically go over, pick it up, take a breath, become the inner healer. So now you become that part that lives within you who is answering the question that Angela just gave. So you answer, then you move back to the Angela person, and she reflects on what she just heard, and then she asks another question, and she goes back over. And once you get past that awkwardness of doing that, it's amazing. You start to realize, I really, there's something alive in this inner healer part that I didn't realize that's giving me, the Angela, my ego consciousness, some information. And all of a sudden at the end of the exchange, you say, gee, that was interesting. Where did that come from? What's that all about? And then you have a chance to reflect on it and see, based on that, you want to do anything different than you would have had you not had the conversation. And oftentimes people say, damn, I will do something different, because it's really it's an insight. It's that aha moment. Now we're back to, what do you do when you leave the space where you've done this, and you're going to the grocery store? You're going to buy something different. You're going to have a little less dessert. You're going to eat more kale. Are you going to have more or less alcohol, and so on and so forth. But it's a whole new re-racking of you with you that can be very healthy.
Okay, very powerful. Well, we're going to take another break, but before we do, can you tell our listeners one more time how they can get in contact with you, and also where your books are available?
Yes, my website is carlgreer.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. My books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, and from Pinhorn Press.
All right, great. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll explore more about how you can change the story of your health and use shamanic practices for healing. You are listening to Masters of Reinvention. I'm Angela Watson Robertson, and I have my guest, Dr. Carl Greer. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.